أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين إنه خير ناصر ومعين ثم الصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على سيدنا ومولانا وطبيب قلوبنا وشفيع ذنوبنا أبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك. عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار، ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين وعلى 9 المعصومين من ذرية الحسين، واللعنة الدائمة على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله الحكيم في محكم كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إنما وليكم الله ورسوله والذين آمنوا الذين يقيمون الصلاة ويؤتون الزكاة وهم راكعون ومن يتولى الله ورسوله والذين آمنوا فإن حزب الله هم الغالبون. صدق الله العلي العظيم. وصلوا على محمد وآله الطاهرين. Respected Maulana, dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. On this night that we've been continuing our conversation on wilaya, so far we have discussed the wilaya of Allah and some of its various dimensions. And then we started talking last night about the wilaya of the Prophet. So this second part of this ayah of Surah Al-Ma'idah, ayah number 55, it talks about our intimate connection that we have with the Prophet. إِنَّمَا وَلِيُّكُمُ اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ. And last night we said that if we want to have a true connection, not only with Allah Himself, but also with His Prophet, then we have to open our hearts and open our minds to be able to accept the truth whenever we see it, to be truly sincere in our search and discovery of the truth. And until we are able to do that, whenever we face the truth, whenever we come across the truth, until we're able to open our hearts and free our minds from maybe a lot of those misconceptions that we already have, until we're able to do that, we will not be able to understand the truth. Once we can be sincere and true in the face of goodness and justice, in the face of the truth, then we can begin to understand what the truth actually tells us. And we said that Allah and His prophets time and time again tell us that this is really the purpose why we are created, right? That we have to go back to Allah and connect to His Prophet. And as well, we looked at the Quran and we said that the Quran tells us that guidance, going back to Allah through the Prophet, can only come to those who are pious, who are virtuous, and who have sincerity in their hearts. So he said in Surah Al-Baqarah, in the beginning of Surah Al-Baqarah, he said that the book of Allah, the Quran, ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابِ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. And then it goes on and describes who these muttaqeen are. So Allah in His book says, that book, whether it's the cosmic, celestial book that Allah has created, or this book that we have in our hands, this Quran, that is a guidance not for just anybody, but it's a guidance specifically for the muttaqin. You have to be muttaqi and virtuous and pious, and then you can access this book. You have to be truly pious and virtuous, and then you can start to search your religion and understand what Islam has to say. But this poses us with an issue, right? The reason why we come and understand and accept Islam is so that we can become muttaqi, for us to become pious and virtuous and good. But the Quran now here is saying, for you to access the book, you have to be muttaqi to begin with. So it's kind of like, which one comes first? Is it the chicken or the egg? Should we be muttaqi before we access the Quran? Or should we access the Quran so that we can become muttaqi? And this is a problem that if we look in the rest of the Quran, and even in this rest of this ayah, it may be resolved. When we look in the Quran, we see that there are various ways that we can approach the Prophet and approach his religion. And there are various ways that we can learn from the lessons that the Prophet gives us, as well as the lessons that the Quran gives us. One of the main ways that the Quran tells us to learn those lessons and inculcate those lessons in our hearts and our minds, so that we can reach that taqwa, is through the words of the Prophet. Right? So, time and time again, we have, for example, the Quran referring to its own words. Right? So in Surah Al-Furqan, mentioned it last night, Allah says, تبارك الذي نزل على عبده الفرقان ليكون للعالمين نذيرا. That Allah, blessed is He who has sent down His Furqan to His servant, to the Prophet, so that he can be a warner to all of creation. So the first way that we can start to access the lessons of the Prophet, to access the lessons of the Quran, is to first of all look at the Prophet's words and look at the Quran itself, and to be able to learn from those words. And then hopefully as time goes on, as we are able to understand those beliefs that we're supposed to have and be able to start to fix our actions, then we can hopefully gain access to that taqwa that Allah requires us to have. And so we see that in the words of the Ahlul Bayt call us to spread their message, their lessons of their words. And there's a very interesting and very profound saying of one of our Imams, Imam Ali ibn Musa al-Reza alayhi salam. Please send a louder salawat. Where the Imam says, he tells to one of his companions that, blessed is that person who will be able to revive our message. Man ahya amrana. Whoever can revive our message. And then this person asks the Imam, what do you mean revive your message? What does that mean? What do you mean revive your affair or your command? And then the Imam looks to him and says, the person who can spread our words and our teachings among the people. Who can tell the people what we had to say. Because once people hear what we have to say, once people hear the lessons from our words, then they surely will be able to follow us. Because those words themselves are so beautiful and so profound that people within their very hearts, because we are all attracted towards goodness and beauty, that very attraction will also attract us to the words of the Imams. Because if the people knew, لو علموا محاسن كلامنا لاتبعونا. If the people knew the beauty of what we had to say, then they would surely follow us. لو علموا محاسن كلامنا لاتبعونا. So the first way we can access the message of Islam and be able to train ourselves and change ourselves to have that taqwa, to be able to incorporate that taqwa into ourselves is to learn from the words of the Ahlul Bayt. And to look at the Quran and start to open the Quran. A lot of times we might say, for example, we say we don't have enough knowledge to access the Quran. Maybe, for example, we haven't learned enough tafsir, or we don't know enough riwayat about the Quran, and so sometimes we put the Quran aside. And we don't really look into the Quran or read it. But what the Quran and the Ahlul Bayt actually teach us in terms of how to access the Quran is that you should just open it and start reading it. Now, you're not going to be able to understand everything, right? You're not going to be able to understand all of the depth of the Quran. But if we have that proper orientation towards the Quran that we spoke about yesterday, that openness to access or openness to the truth, trying to discover what the truth actually tells us, then we won't have the pride or the haughtiness to be able to close ourselves off to the Quran. So if we open the Quran, we try to understand what they have to say, what the Quran has to say or what the Ahlul Bayt have to say, then maybe Allah will give us the knowledge that is required to understand it. So we have to look at the words of the Quran. Now, that's the first step. Another level of the teaching that we have from the Ahlul Bayt is not just the words that the Ahlul Bayt give us. In fact, when we look at the ahadith of the Ahlul Bayt, beyond just the words that the Ahlul Bayt said, there's actually a whole set of other characteristics and behaviors that the Ahlul Bayt taught us. So some of the ahadith talk about the words, right? Sort of certain words, the lessons that the Ahlul Bayt told us. Another set of ahadith actually don't even have any words whatsoever. So for example, somebody will come to the Imam, say for example, Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, and he will maybe do his salat, or maybe he will do his wudu, or something to that effect. He will maybe do an action that is part of his religion or his regular custom. And then if the Imam doesn't say anything when he sees this, we actually consider that as a part of our ahadith. The Imam's silence, the fact that the Imam doesn't say anything when he sees somebody doing something, we understand from that, because the Imam is supposed to guide people, we understand from that very fact that this is something acceptable in our religion. So not just the Imam's words, but even the Imam's silence is a part of the ahadith. And beyond that, some of the most beautiful ahadith that we have from the Imams as well as from the Prophet himself is not just in terms of his words, not just in terms of their silence, but in terms of their actions. In terms of their actions. So when we look at the actions of the Prophet, when we look at the actions when the Prophet, how the Prophet would relate to other people, how the Prophet would speak with other people, how the Prophet would act when he was around other people. There are many ahadith that say that the Prophet, for example, would never eat alone. Whenever he wanted to eat something, whenever he wanted to have, whether it's lunch or dinner or breakfast, whatever it was, the Prophet would always try to find someone to share that meal with. He would always try to eat with someone else, try to maybe share this blessing of Allah with another human being. When we read about the Prophet's behavior and character towards other people around him, he would never, it is said that from various ahadith, and one of the main sources that we have about the Prophet's behavior is through Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. And that is how the Prophet would, for example, whenever he was with his companions, he would never extend his legs in front of his companions. He was always sitting in a very humble and, not at all in a proud manner, in a prideful manner. He was always in a very humble state, even when he was sitting with his companions. Whenever he was talking to someone, he would always face them directly. He would always give them his full attention, until that person would turn away from him. And once that person was done with whatever business they had with the Prophet, then he would turn away. I mean, think about it. Think about the context of this. The Prophet, he has all of these responsibilities. right? He had all of these things probably on his mind. All of these things that are weighing down his soul, and yet he gives his full attention to whoever he's speaking with. And this is who our Prophet is. Not only his words are beautiful, but his behavior and his actions towards other people. So when we read these words, when we read about the behavior and the actions of the Prophet, we see that the Prophet was someone who really cared about other human beings. He really deeply, from a very sincere place, cared about those who were around him. Not just because they were his companions. We have story after story of how the Prophet would care about the people of Mecca and Medina because they were creatures of Allah, because they were human beings that Allah had created. And so the more we are able to bring the Prophet's presence into our lives, the more we are able to read about the Prophet's behavior and character, then the more we can understand who he actually was. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. And we see that it's through the behavior of the Prophet that Allah also teaches us the message that he is trying to convey. And in fact, if we really think about it, well, why did Allah not just suffice with giving a book? Right, yesterday we talked about some of the criteria and some of the standards that the mushrikun and the kuffar had for what a prophet should be like. Right, we said that in Surah Al-Furqan, it describes for us some of the critiques that the mushrikun have against the Prophet. They said, for example, مَا لِهَذَا الرَّسُولِ يَأْكُلُ الطَّعَامِ وَيَمْشِي فِي الْأَسْوَاقِ. This Prophet is kind of a strange person. He claims to be a messenger from Allah, and yet he eats food just like we do. He walks through the markets and the bazaars just like we do. And walking through the markets and bazaars is kind of a symbol. It's not actually walking through the bazaars and the markets. What they're trying to say is the Prophet would make his own livelihood and make his own living through his own hands. So he would, say for example, have a job, right? We know the Prophet would take caravans to different places. He was a businessman and a trader. And these people were saying that if he's truly a messenger of Allah, why does he have to do all this work on his own? Why does he have to eat like we do? Why does he have to be like we are? Why didn't God, and in Surah Al-Furqan it explains, why didn't God send an angel instead of a person like us? Which is, maybe some question that we have sometimes. Why is it that the Prophet wasn't an absolutely perfect being that has none of the defects of another human being? Right? We see our own lives and we see all the defects in our own lives. Why did the Prophet have to have these same behaviors or these same responsibilities that we do as human beings? Now, there are many reasons why Allah does what he does, and we can't quite make sense of everything that Allah does. But we can try to understand and discover why Allah presents his religion in this way. One of the reasons that comes to mind is that when we are trying to understand something, when we're trying to make sense of something, we have to have an image of what that thing is. We have to have some sort of mental picture of what that is. So there is in Islamic civilization, in the Islamic sciences, there is this phrase that's used. Man faqada hissan faqad faqada ilman. Whoever doesn't have loses one of their senses. So it could be their sight, their hearing, or say for example, their ability to smell or their ability to taste. That person will lose a form of knowledge. So for example, if God forbid, one day God takes away our sense of smell, then we won't be able to understand what it means what a flower smells like. Or if, say for example, God takes away our ability to hear, then we won't be able to understand what it means like to be, for example, a baby's cry or something like that, right? We won't be able to understand a part of God's creation. And so whenever God takes away one of our senses, we will actually stop being able to understand something about the world. We won't have that understanding in our minds. Maybe one of the reasons that Allah creates and sends His messenger in this way is so that we can see, not just hear the words, but we can see these things in action. We can see goodness in action. We can see what the Prophet is like, both in good times and in bad times. We can see how the Prophet deals with, say for example, a situation where a normal person would become angry, or a normal person would become impatient. And we can, through that behavior of the Prophet, we can have a sense of what it would be like to control your anger, or what it would be like to be patient in the face of difficulty. Right? So we have this image in our minds. What does it mean to be, say for example, forbearing and kind towards the people around you? What this does for us, when we have this person in our life, when we have this being in our life, and we see how it looks like to interact with other people in a good way, what it does for us is it expands our horizons. So for example, if I am trying to make myself a good person, if I'm trying to stop myself from getting angry in a particular situation, I don't want to get angry very quickly, I want to work on myself and try to become a better person. There's only so much that I can do, right? Because I see myself time and time again, I see myself getting angry in a certain situation, or for example, I grow impatient with my children, or I do something that I shouldn't be doing. And time again, I might sort of get angry at myself, and then I can't break that cycle. I can't break the cycle of, say for example, anger or impatience. What it does for us when we have someone in our lives who is good and who can control their anger and who is patient in the face of difficulty, that allows us to see what does it mean like in action, not just in words. In action, what it would be like for a person to be truly, say for example, patient. Or to not get angry so quickly. It expands our horizons. And it allows us to be more creative in the way that we deal with those situations. So it's actually it's a much more effective tool if we're able to find people who are pious in our lives. And for us to get closer to those people. For example, a lot of us might, when we have memories of our grandfathers or our grandmothers, right, we know that they are, really sort of good people. Deep down inside, they're really good people. Whenever we come into a situation, if we are able to remember what our parents or what our grandparents would do in that situation, not only does that control our reaction, but it also gives us the ability to go beyond ourselves. So go beyond that cycle of, say for example, anger, or go beyond that cycle of impatience. Just to kind of have that image in our minds. And through that image, we're able to go beyond ourselves. I know in this situation I would normally get angry, but because I have this image of someone who is able to do it, who is able to suppress their anger, I can do it as well. And so if we have this image of the Prophet's behavior in our mind, if we, for example, read more about the Prophet's behavior, if we read more about how the Prophet would, for example, pray to Allah, that his family would all of a sudden see that he is not in his bed late at night, and finally they come and they try to search for where the Prophet is, and they see that he is prostrating from the beginning of the night until the end. When we see this true devotion and his love for Allah, that's when we begin to have this broader horizon, this horizon of possibilities. It broadens itself. So if we have this image of the Prophet in our minds, then hopefully, inshallah, we can slowly become more and more like the Prophet. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. And in fact, if we are trying to become more like the Prophet, we should look at how the Prophet describes himself. What are the characteristics that the Prophet sees himself that he wants his Muslims and the followers of his message to be more like? So there is a very profound hadith from the Prophet where Jibra'il comes to the Prophet. He says that Jibra'il tells the Prophet that your Lord has commanded you, Allah has commanded you to become and have better akhlaq, to have husnul khulq, to have beautiful character. And then as Jibra'il is saying this, and once Jibra'il finishes his message, he says basically that if you have husnul khulq, then you will have the blessings and the goodness of this entire world. And if you don't have husnul khulq, this interaction, this good interaction and good behavior and characteristics towards other people, then you will lose khairud dunya wal akhirah. You will lose all of the goodness of this world and in the hereafter. And then what's interesting is the final part of this hadith. When the Prophet is describing himself, he describes himself among all of the possible characteristics that the Prophet could have chosen from. He describes himself in terms of husnul khulq. Ala wa inna ashbahakum bi hasanul khulq. A person who is the most similar to me is not a person who maybe, for example, has a long beard or looks like me, or not a person who wears maybe old Arabic clothing, that they would wear back in the day, have short, say for example, a thobe or dishdasha. Not a person who carries his miswak around with him, or all of the superficial characteristics of the Prophet. It's a person who has husnul khulq, a person who has beautiful characteristics. Now what's interesting here is the word khulq itself. What does it mean to have khulq? When we look in the Arabic language, khulq isn't just about adab or behavior or etiquette. Khulq is about our very nature. And another word for khulq in Arabic is sajiyya, is our nature. So for example, if we were to look at, say for example, sugar, right? Take the sugar, if you take away sweetness from sugar, it stops being sugar. Maybe it becomes salt or something else. It just becomes a white, right? Crystal, white substance. If you take away, for example, I don't know, black ink, and you take away the blackness from that ink, it doesn't become ink anymore. It doesn't become black ink anymore. If you take away a characteristic that's part of the nature of something, like taking away sweetness from sugar, that stops becoming sugar. That's what sajiyya or khuluq is. It's a characteristic that's so intrinsic to that thing. It's so bound up in what that thing is that if you were to take it away from that thing, then it would stop being the same thing. What the Prophet is trying to tell us is that beauty and goodness should be so much a part of our characteristic that if we were to be in any situation whatsoever, whatever situation we might be, the most difficult situation or the easiest one, whatever situation we might be, that husnul khulq, that beauty of our characteristic will never be taken away from us. And in fact, that's what the Prophet was like. In the most difficult situation or in the easiest, the Prophet was always with this beautiful characteristic. Now, he wasn't always kind. For example, a situation that required violence or a situation that required some sort of aggression, the Prophet had to be aggressive. In a situation that required kindness and required goodness and compassion, the Prophet was compassionate and good. But in any situation which the Prophet found himself, he was always with this goodness and beauty of character. What the Prophet is trying to tell us in this hadith of the Prophet, Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, the Prophet is basically asking us that if you are a person who doesn't have this beautiful characteristic, this beauty or goodness is not a part of your nature, then you should change yourself so that you would become more like me. This takes us to our initial question. If we are not muttaqi, if we are, for example, not of this beautiful characteristic, then how can we open ourselves up to the message of Islam? And if the message of Islam is basically only for the muttaqin, We said that, is it the chicken or the egg? Should we first be muttaqi before we become religious? Or before we look at the Quran? Or should we look at the Quran so that we can become muttaqi? The secret to this, or maybe one of the secrets, let's say, to this question is in this concept of wilaya itself. When we talk about wilaya, mention that wilaya, one of the translations, possible translations for wilaya, is this intimate connection that we have with someone. This sort of deep alignment and orientation that we have towards another person. And this intimate connection can show itself up in terms of the love that we have towards someone, or that close relationship that we have with someone in terms of if they say something, we will do it, without any question whatsoever. This wilaya, this intimate connection. And we see that time and time again, the Prophet himself and the Ahlul Bayt tell us that we should have this love towards them. We should have this wilaya towards them. They're one of the only people that we should have wilaya towards. We should have wilaya towards Allah, Rasul, and the mu'minun. The reason for that is because the more we have wilaya towards another person, the more we love another person, the more we love another being, the more we automatically become like them. It's not even a question of, say for example, remembering certain attributes or remembering certain sayings, remembering certain lessons that they give us. The more we love a person, the more we become automatically like them. So when the Prophet is commanded to say by Allah, قُلْ لَا أَسْأَلُكُمْ عَلَيْهِ أَجْرًا إِلَّا الْمَوَدَّةَ فِي الْقُرْبَى, the Prophet's only recompense, the Prophet's only compensation is not just love in terms of our hearts, but love in terms of our actions. What this means is, when we love someone, we're able to go beyond ourselves. Right? So for example, when a mother loves her child, they're able to think beyond their own person. They're be able to think beyond what they want and what they need. Once we are able to do this, once we truly love the Prophet, not just in our hearts, but we start to work on that love. Once we have that intimate connection with the Prophet, then we can slowly think beyond ourselves and think, well, what would the Prophet do in this situation? Right? Not just thinking about it in our minds, but thinking about it through our hearts. And slowly we see that we start to become another person. We start to become another human being. Our nature starts to change. And then once our nature starts changing, then our actions automatically and our words and our thoughts start to change themselves. So where this entire journey of wilaya with Allah and with His prophets, where that journey starts, is through inculcating a love and creating a bond, an intimate bond with the Prophet and with Allah, through our hearts. How that happens, of course, is remembering them, is reading more about how the Prophet would react in a particular situation. And once we are able to read about the Prophet and how he would respond in a situation, we see the beauty in his words and in his behavior, then automatically we also start loving him even more. So when, for example, we hear or we read about the Prophet's behavior, we see that that's something that every single person wants to do themselves anyway. You want to respect other people around you, and if you see someone who respects another person around him, then you automatically find an affection and a love for that person. So the more we read about the prophets, the more we automatically come closer towards them. إِنَّ النَّاسِ لَوْ عَلِمُوا مَحَاسِنَ كَلَامِنَا لَاتَّبِعُونَا. If they knew about the beauty of what our words were, if they knew the beauty of our lessons, it's not just because they would hear our words and they will memorize them, for example. It's not just because they will hear our, say for example, our behaviors and our characteristics and they will memorize them. But the more we hear the words and the behavior of the Prophet, the closer and closer we become to them. Because those words and those behaviors are things that kind of touch us on a very deep level. And once we have that love, and the more we work on that love, the more we become another human being. the more we can become that muttaqeen that the Quran talks about. And once that happens, it starts a chain, it starts a process. And we said that love isn't just, an end that we're trying to get to. It's not just, say for example, a goal that we're trying to get to. It's a process. It's step by step. Every single day we work at it and we work at it. When we, for example, for those of us who are married or for those of us who have children, we can kind of sense this, right? We have, say for example, sometime that our child maybe does a mistake or commits some sort of error, and we say it's okay. They do something else and then we start to love them again. Or say for example, they grow up and they do certain things that make them endearing to our hearts. Or for example, our spouses, we work at our relationship and we grow together and together. And it's through that process. Every single time that we are around them and we're present, they are present in our lives and we're present in theirs, we start to grow together and we grow closer to each other. And in fact, this is the relationship that Allah and His Prophet ask us to have with Him. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And Allah gives us certain means to do this. So if we look in the words of the Ahlul Bayt, we see that Allah gives us certain signals or certain means to get closer to the Prophet. So in fact, there is a very profound hadith from Imam as-Sadiq alayhi salam, which says one of his companions come and ask him, what is the whole point of doing salat? What's the whole purpose? Imam Sadiq says there are many reasons why Allah has legislated this. One of the reasons is that Allah wanted us to have the Prophet be in our lives. If Allah had, say for example, revealed the book, the Quran, and if He had just left it at that, this Muslim ummah, this Muslim community would be exactly like all of those previous religions. They would just have a book. Maybe they've heard certain things about this book, but they would, after a certain while, they'll forget that person that brought this book, and that means by which Allah brought this book, and that teacher who's supposed to come and explain the book. And once that happens, then they'll put the book aside. Because we don't have any real connection, we don't have any love for a book. We will read it, maybe we'll think about it at a certain point, but then we'll put it aside. What Imam Sadiq says is one of the purposes for salat is so that we remind ourselves on a day-to-day basis. Every single day, we know that the Prophet prayed in this way. In fact, one of the ways that we get the prayer that we do on a day-to-day basis is from a hadith that tells us, this is a hadith from Imam as-Sadiq alayhi salam, where Imam Sadiq shows one of his companions how to pray, and he actually does the prayer himself. And we know that this is exactly the way that the Prophet prayed. So one of the main ways, one of the main reasons we have this prayer, one of the main ways that we can have the Prophet in our lives is to realize that the purpose behind not just individual acts in our religion, the purpose behind our Sharia, one of the reasons, one of the most important reasons that we have this Sharia is to be connected to the Prophet. We have in another instance, someone comes to Aisha and asks her, what was the behavior of the Prophet like? She responds, have you read the Quran? Are you a person who reads the Quran on a day-to-day basis? And he says, yes, of course, I'm a Muslim, I read the Quran. She says, the Prophet's behavior was the Quran. Whatever the Quran said, that's what the Prophet's behavior is. So if you want to know who the Prophet was, read the Quran. Read how the Quran tells us to behave. So if we want to connect to the Prophet, want to have that love for the Prophet, then read the Quran. Read your salat. Do your salat and realize that this is the way that we can connect to the Prophet. Now let's turn our attention to Karbala. We see that there is another hadith from the Ahlul Bayt where the Ahlul Bayt tell us, Inna za'ira al-Husayn za'ira Rasulullah. Inna za'ir al-Husayn za'iru Rasulullah. Whoever goes and visits Abu Abdullah al-Husayn, he has visited the Prophet of Allah. So if we get closer to Imam Hussein, the closer we get to Imam Hussein, the closer we get to the Prophet. And indeed, we have multiple narrations that tell us that Imam Hussein and his family were the closest to the Prophet, not just in their blood, not just in their lineage, but also in their actions and in their words. They were the closest to the Prophet. And we see time and time again, it is the Ahlul Bayt, the family of Imam Hussein, who are willing to sacrifice the most for Abu Abdullah, for Imam Hussein. And we see this the clearest in Lady Zainab. When Lady Zainab is born, they bring her to the Prophet. And the Prophet turns to Lady Fatima and to those who have given her Lady Zainab. And the Prophet, it is reported, says, this daughter of mine, this granddaughter of mine, she is going to face one trial after another. She is going to face one musibah after another. And the greatest of those trials and difficulties is that she's going to see the death of her own brother, the martyrdom of her own brother, the sacrifice of her own brother in a land far, far away. But we see that that is not the only sacrifice that Lady Zainab gives in the path of Imam Hussein. We see that when the time comes, Lady Zainab prepares her two sons. Now think about that situation. Think about, bring it in your mind's eye, what Lady Zainab must have been going through. She has these two sons, Awn and Muhammad. She has raised them with her own hands, and this old lady has raised these two sons with her own blood and sweat. And now, when it is at the prime of their lives, they find themselves in this situation. Normally, a mother will look forward to the life of her children, to the success of her children. But we see that Lady Zainab, maybe before she would have thought about their success, but now, the night before Ashura, Lady Zainab is preparing her children. She's preparing them for that sacrifice. Maybe she goes towards her children and tells them, "Oh Awn, oh Muhammad, tomorrow you better show your courage in front of those enemy soldiers. Tomorrow you better not make me disappointed in front of my brother. He is going to give everything that he has, and before he does, I want you to sacrifice yourself. This is one thing that I look forward to, and it's a source of pride for me to sacrifice my own blood and my own sweat for Imam Hussein, to give everything that I have for Imam Hussein." And so when the time comes, Awn and Muhammad look to Imam Hussein, and Lady Zainab tells them to go and ask for permission to go and fight. And Awn and Muhammad come to Imam Hussein and they say, "Ya Abu Abdullah, oh our uncle, Ya Hussein, can we go out and fight for you now? Can we sacrifice ourselves for you now? Has the time come for us?" And Imam Hussein turns them around and he gives one reason or another, one excuse or another to turn them back. He says, "Oh Awn and Muhammad, you are my soldiers. You are strong and brave men. What will I do when you are gone?" And he turns them back. And Awn and Muhammad go back to the tents, and then they come back. They can't face their mother and tell her that Imam Hussein did not accept them. And so they go back to Imam Hussein, and repeatedly, Lady Zainab then looks to them and says, "Why are you still here? Why are you still alive? I have given you in the path of Imam Hussein. Why are you still alive?" And Awn and Muhammad look to their mother. They tell her, "Imam Hussein will not accept our sacrifice. We keep going to him, but he turns us around." Lady Zainab says, "I will go and ask for permission for you."
Lady Zainab goes to Imam Hussein, it is reported, and says, Ya Aba Abdullah, Ya Hussein, is my sacrifice not sufficient? And finally, after a lot of pleading, Lady Zainab does, Imam Hussein finally accepts and allows them to go to the battle. And so Owen and Muhammad fight a brave and difficult fight. One after another, they give their lives and they give their blood for Imam Hussein, and finally they are cut down by the enemy, and finally they fall to the ground. And Imam Hussein runs to Owen and he runs to Muhammad, and Hazrat Abbas runs to Owen and runs to Muhammad with Imam Hussein, and yet they see that Lady Zainab is nowhere to be found. Whenever one of the Ahlul Bayt would fall to the ground, Lady Zainab was there to console them. Lady Zainab was there to help. But Lady Zainab is nowhere to be found. And so Imam Hussein turns around as he's bringing the bodies back. He looks for Lady Zainab to see where she is. And he sees her in the tents with this peace and tranquility that finally my sacrifice has been given. And finally my sacrifice has been accepted. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un wa sayalamu alladhina zalamu ayya munqalabin yanqalibun. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.